The air in the Naval Medical Center waiting area was a sterile amalgam of antiseptic, floor polish, and quiet dread. It was a place of enforced equality. Admirals and seamen alike sat on the same unforgiving plastic chairs, staring at the same travel posters of places they had already been. Commander Evelyn Reed sat perfectly still, her back straight, not touching the backrest. Her file, a thin manila folder for a routine periodic health assessment, rested squarely on her lap. She was tracking the patterns of the ceiling tiles, a simple geometric meditation to pass the time. The quiet was broken by the clatter of gear and the loud camaraderie of men who lived in a bubble of violent certainty. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thorne and 3 members of his SEAL team entered, fresh from a session in the dive tank. Their hair was still damp, and they carried an aura of chlorine and supreme self-confidence. They were titans in this sterile space, their operational gear seeming to suck the very air out of the room. Thorne, a man carved from granite and arrogance, scanned the waiting plebeians and his eyes landed on Reed. He saw a small, compact woman in a crisp, unadorned uniform. He saw quiet, and his world translated quiet as weak. Well, look what we have here, Thorne said, his voice a low boom meant for his audience of 3. They're letting administrative staff use the fast-track line now. One of his men, a younger lieutenant, snickered. Careful, Marcus. That's a whole commander right there. Probably commands a legion of staplers. The laughter was contained but sharp. Reed did not react. Her eyes remained on the ceiling tiles. She did not look at them. She did not acknowledge their existence. This, to Thorne, was an even greater offense than fear. It was indifference. He sauntered over, planting himself in front of her, blocking her view. Hey, Commander, you hear me talking to you? Reed slowly lowered her gaze, her eyes meeting his. They were calm, the color of a winter sea, and held no trace of anger or intimidation. I hear you, Lieutenant Commander. Her voice was low, devoid of inflection. Periodic health assessment? He asked, gesturing at her folder with a condescending flick of his wrist. Making sure you're fit for duty behind that big mahogany desk. Something like that, she replied, her gaze unwavering. Thorne leaned in, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for everyone in the waiting area to hear. You know, some of us have to actually use our bodies for our work. We break things. We get broken. We come here to get put back together so we can go break more things. What's the worst you have to worry about? Carpal tunnel. His men chuckled again. Reed remained silent. Her stillness was a challenge Thorne couldn't decipher. He was used to reactions, fear, anger, even flirtation. This placid wall of composure was new, and it infuriated him. Across the room, sitting in a separate alcove reserved for flag officers, Rear Admiral Vance watched the exchange over the top of a well-worn copy of a naval history journal. A former SEAL himself from the old UDT days, he recognized Thorne's brand of peacetime predation. It was a cancer in the teams, a swagger that confused reputation with competence. He was about to intervene, to pull rank and shut Thorne down, but then something caught his eye. As Thorne gestured dismissively, Reed shifted slightly in her chair. The cuff of her uniform sleeve rode up less than an inch, but it was enough. Under the flat, unforgiving fluorescent lights, Vance saw the scars. They were not the clean, straight lines of a surgical knife, nor the puckered stars of shrapnel wounds he knew so well. These were different. A fine, silvery lattice of keloids wrapped around her wrist and disappeared up her forearm, intricate and strange, almost like Lichtenberg figures, the patterns left by a massive electrical discharge. Interspersed within the web were deeper, smoother scars that looked like pressure marks, as if her arm had been crushed in a vice with a serrated jaw. He had seen thousands of wounds in his 40-year career. He had never seen scars like those. They were brutally unique. His brow furrowed. He filed the image away, a piece of data without context. Thorne, having failed to get a rise out of her, finally gave up. Whatever. Have fun with your paperwork. Commander, he and his team moved to the check-in desk, their boisterous talk filling the vacuum their confrontation had created. Reed did not watch them go. She simply adjusted her cuff, pulling it back down to its proper place, and returned her gaze to the ceiling. The incident was over. For them. For her, it was now data, a time-stamped event to be logged. An hour later, back in her Spartan bachelor officer quarters, Commander Reed powered on a ruggedized tactical tablet. The room was monastic in its simplicity. A perfectly made bunk, a single desk with the tablet and a charging station, and one steel locker against the far wall. There were no photos, no mementos, no personal touches, save for a small, burnished metal disc on her desk she used as a paperweight, though there was never any paper to weigh down. She opened a secure application, a personal log encrypted beyond military standards. A new entry appeared. Date, time, 1432 Zulu. Location, Naval Medical Center, Waiting Area 3. Event, verbal provocation. Subject, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thorne, SEAL Team 5. Witnesses, 3 unidentified members of his unit, approximately 12 other service members. 1 flag officer, unidentified, appeared to be Rear Admiral, upper half. Nature of provocation, disparagement of non-combat role, condescension regarding fitness for duty. My response, minimal verbal engagement, no escalation. She paused, her fingers hovering over the holographic keyboard. She added one more line. Conclusion. Subject Thorne exhibits behavior consistent with peacetime operational tempo syndrome. Confuses kinetic aggression with strategic value. Potential liability in integrated operations. Logged for pattern analysis. She closed the file. The process was automatic, ingrained. Documentation over escalation. Let the data accumulate. Let the pattern reveal itself. There was no anger, no feeling of being slighted. There was only the cold, clear process of information management. She stood and walked to the steel locker. She keyed in a code, and the heavy door swung open. Inside, hanging alone, was a single old flight suit, meticulously maintained. Pinned to the chest was a patch, faded and worn. It depicted a black phoenix rising from a cascade of static and deep blue waves. The Latin motto stitched beneath it was barely legible. Fides Antennabris. Faith in the antennas. She ran her fingers over the frayed embroidery, a silent ritual of recalibration. She was not a commander of staplers. She was a guardian of the signal, a sentinel of the unseen world where battles were won or lost in the spaces between heartbeats, in the silent scream of manipulated data. She closed the locker. The incident was logged. Her focus was already shifting to the next task. The upcoming Joint Task Force exercise, Vigilant Trident, an exercise where she would be providing C4I support to SEAL Team 5. To Lieutenant Commander Thorne. The formal complaint arrived 2 days later via official channels. It was a masterpiece of professional condescension, written by Thorne but likely polished by a more articulate subordinate. It requested Commander Reed's removal from the primary planning cell for Vigilant Trident. The justification was couched in the language of operational safety. Commander Reed, Thorne had written, while undoubtedly a competent administrator, lacks the requisite field experience and tactical mindset to provide real-time, dynamic C4I support for a direct action mission profile. Her risk-averse, academic approach could introduce fatal hesitation into the kill chain. We request she be replaced by an officer with a more grounded, operator-centric perspective. The complaint was a direct provocation, an escalation from hallway mockery to a professional attack. It landed on the desk of Captain Davies, the exercise director. Davies was an institutional zealot, a man who believed the chain of command was sacrosanct and that SEALs were the tip of the spear, to be sharpened, not questioned. He saw Thorne's request as reasonable. An operator knows what an operator needs. He summoned Reed to his office. The room was a shrine to naval tradition, filled with ship models and plaques. Davies sat behind a large desk, the picture of authority. "Commander," he began without preamble, "I have a formal request here from Lieutenant Commander Thorne. He has concerns about your suitability for the C4I lead on Vigilant Trident." Reed stood at attention, her expression neutral. I have read the request, Captain. And, Davies prompted, leaning back in his chair. Do you have a response to his assessment? Lieutenant Commander Thorne's assessment is based on incomplete data, she stated calmly. Davies arched an eyebrow. Incomplete data? He seems to think your data is the problem. He's concerned you'll be staring at a screen while his men are walking into a buzzsaw. My function is to ensure they know the buzzsaw is there, Captain, Reed replied, and to change the direction of the blades. The captain was not impressed. That's a fine metaphor, Commander. But Thorne is the one on the ground. His men, his risk. He wants an officer he trusts. I'm inclined to grant his request. I'll reassign you to a secondary Overwatch role. You can monitor from the main operations center, but Lieutenant Miller from the Marine Cyberspace Command will take the primary seat with the SEALs. It was a public humiliation, a demotion in the middle of a critical exercise. Reed's gaze didn't flicker. I understand your position, Captain. However, I believe removing me from the primary role introduces a greater risk than leaving me in place. Lieutenant Miller is proficient, but the hostile EW environment simulated in this exercise is built around a polymorphic frequency hopping algorithm I designed. I am uniquely qualified to counter it. Davies waved a dismissive hand. The exercise parameters are classified. Thorne isn't aware of the specifics, and frankly, neither am I. All I know is that my lead operator is expressing a lack of confidence in his support. In this world, Commander, confidence is ammunition. I'm making the change. Captain, I formally request you reconsider, Reed said, her voice still level, but with a new edge of precision. My analysis suggests a 97% probability of mission failure under the proposed command structure. Specifically, a total communications blackout within the first 10 minutes of infiltration, followed by catastrophic loss of tactical awareness. Davies's face hardened. That sounds like a threat, Commander. It is a forecast, Captain, she corrected him. Based on the data, I will have my full report on your desk within the hour, detailing the projected failure points. Don't bother, Davies snapped. My decision is final. You are on secondary Overwatch. You will support Lieutenant Miller as directed. Is that understood? Yes, Captain, Reed said. She did not say crystal or perfectly. She said yes, a single, sharp syllable of compliance. She rendered a crisp salute, turned on her heel, and walked out. Back in her workspace, a small, shielded container filled with humming servers, she did not write a letter of protest or complain to her peers. She opened the exercise's C4I planning file. She duplicated her entire mission package, the signal intelligence analysis, the EW countermeasures, the network infiltration protocols, and placed them in a sealed, time-locked directory. She labeled it Contingency Protocol Phoenix. Then, she began building a minimalist support package for Lieutenant Miller, giving him exactly what he would need to perform adequately, but holding back the elegant, predictive tools she had designed. She was following orders, but she was also preparing for the inevitable. She was preparing for the data to prove her forecast correct. The day of the exercise arrived with a low, gray sky that threatened rain. The target was a simulated enemy compound nestled in a river valley, surrounded by dense elephant grass that swayed in the humid breeze. Inside the dark, cavernous interior of the main operations center, the air was cold and smelled of ozone. A massive holographic map of the valley dominated the room, a shimmering, three-dimensional representation of the battlefield. Dozens of technicians monitored feeds, their faces illuminated by the glow of their consoles. Captain Davies stood on the command platform, observing the unfolding operation with a satisfied expression. Lieutenant Miller, a young, eager officer, sat at the primary C4I console, patched directly into SEAL Team 5's comms. Commander Reed was relegated to a secondary station in the back corner, her screen showing only generalized network traffic data. She was, for all intents and purposes, a spectator. Alpha Team is moving to insert point 1. Thorne's voice crackled over the main speakers, confident and clear. Comms are green across the board. Tell Miller he's doing a fine job. Miller flushed with pride. You're all clear, Alpha Lead. No hostile emissions detected. Reed watched her screen. A flicker of encrypted data, masked as background noise, appeared for a nanosecond and then vanished. It was the handshake protocol for the polymorphic algorithm. The trap was being set. She made a silent log entry. For 7 minutes, the infiltration was flawless. The holographic map showed Thorne's team, represented by blue icons, moving swiftly through the grass toward the compound. 2 minutes to breach point, Thorne reported. This is too easy. Then, precisely as Reed had forecasted, it happened. A wave of red static washed over the main holographic map. The blue icons vanished. Every screen tracking SEAL Team 5 went black. Alpha Lead, do you copy? The main comms officer shouted. Only a deafening hiss replied. What the hell was that? Davies demanded, turning to Miller. Miller was typing furiously, his face pale. I don't know, sir. Complete blackout. Encrypted and non-encrypted channels. It's like they just disappeared. Thorne, can you hear me? Use burst transmission, the comms officer yelled. Silence. In the corner, Reed watched the raw data stream. The enemy network was alive, chattering with a complex, adaptive frequency hopping pattern that changed every millisecond. It wasn't just jamming the SEALs. It was hunting for their emitters, preparing a simulated electronic counterattack that would have pinpointed their location for a mortar strike. Miller, get them back online, Davies barked, his composure cracking. I can't, sir. I can't even find their signal, let alone break through this jamming. The room was descending into controlled panic. On the command platform, Rear Admiral Vance, who had been observing quietly from the back, stepped forward. He had not forgotten the incident in the medical center, nor Thorne's arrogant complaint. He looked past the frantic Miller, his gaze sweeping the room until it found the comm center of the storm. He looked directly at Commander Reed. She met his gaze. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. That was all the authorization she needed. Reed's hands moved over her console with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing. She wasn't fighting the enemy's jamming. That would be a brute force waste of energy. She was listening to it, mapping its polymorphic dance. She brought up Contingency Protocol Phoenix. With a few keystrokes, she launched a passive signals intelligence probe, a ghost that rode the enemy's own chaotic waveforms. It didn't try to break in. It mimicked the jamming signal's latency signatures, fooling the network into thinking it was one of its own nodes. Within 10 seconds, she had a complete map of the enemy's network architecture. Within 20, she had identified the master control node. She didn't destroy it. She hijacked it. Inside Thorne's helmet, his heads-up display had been a sheet of blinding static. He and his men were crouched in the elephant grass, deaf and blind, weapons up, expecting an attack from any direction. The feeling of being cut off was a cold dread that settled deep in his gut. His multi-million-dollar communications gear was as useful as a rock. Suddenly, the static in his ear vanished. It was replaced by a single, calm tone. His HUD flickered, the static collapsing into a single point of light that then blossomed into a crystal-clear, three-dimensional map of the compound in front of him. It wasn't the standard Blue Force tracker feed. This was something else. It showed the compound, the location of every one of his men, and, glowing in stark red, the real-time positions of every single hostile role-player inside. It even traced their patrol paths in faint, predictive red lines. What the hell is this? His number 2 whispered over the newly restored channel. Reed's voice, filtered through the system but unmistakable, came through their earpieces. It was calm, precise, and held no hint of triumph. Alpha Lead, this is Phoenix. You have a new tactical feed. Hostile signatures are marked in red. You are clear to proceed. Correction was achieved. Thorne was speechless. He could see 2 hostiles moving toward their position, completely unaware of the SEAL's presence. He gave a series of silent hand signals. His team moved with brutal efficiency, flowing around the corner of the building. The exercise was over 90 seconds later. Every hostile neutralized, the hostage secured, 0 friendly casualties. It was a perfect run, executed in the final moments not by his skill, but by the ghostly intelligence fed directly into his brain. The debriefing room was thick with attention that could stop a clock. The entire sequence had been recorded. On one screen was the chaotic log from Lieutenant Miller's console, a frantic mess of failed handshake attempts and error messages. On the adjacent, larger screen was the log from Reed's station. It was a thing of beauty, an elegant, flowing script of code that showed her passive analysis, the network hijack, and the seamless data push to Thorne's team. It was less a record of a firefight and more like a symphony score. Lieutenant Commander Thorne stood stiffly, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning humiliation. His team sat behind him, their usual boisterous energy completely gone. They kept glancing from the screen to Commander Reed, who sat at a small table at the side of the room, observing the proceedings with her customary stillness. Captain Davies cleared his throat, his face flushed. Well, it appears there was a significant electronic warfare component to this exercise that was not fully anticipated by the primary C4I officer. He was trying to frame it as Miller's failure, a survivable mistake. With all due respect, Captain. Thorne's voice was rough, strained. That's not what happened. We were blind, dead in the water. Then, she switched the lights on. Not just for us. For the enemy too. She showed us where they were going. It was like having a God's eye view. He turned and looked directly at Reed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, bewildered respect. Commander, what was that? Before Reed could answer, Rear Admiral Vance spoke from the head of the table. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a laser. What that was, Lieutenant Commander, was competence. Vance looked at Captain Davies, his eyes cold. Captain, I reviewed your decision to sideline Commander Reed. I also reviewed her forecast, which predicted this failure with 97% accuracy. You chose to ignore a data-driven warning in favor of what you called operator confidence. The only thing that prevented this from being a catastrophic failure, simulated or otherwise, was Commander Reed's refusal to let protocol stand in the way of mission success. Your judgment in this matter was flawed. We will be discussing it later. Davies paled, shrinking in his chair. Vance then activated the main screen, overriding the debriefing logs. He brought up a single, sealed document, Thorne's formal complaint against Reed. He let everyone in the room read the condescending words again. Lack of field experience, he read aloud. Risk-averse, academic approach. He toggled the screen again, this time to Reed's official service record. Most of it was redacted, huge blocks of black ink hiding years of service. But one entry was left visible. Project Trident. Deep-range signal intelligence. Sole survivor. Vance's gaze settled on Reed. Commander, would you mind? He gestured toward her wrist. Slowly, deliberately, Reed reached over and unbuttoned her cuff. She pushed the sleeve up to her elbow. The room fell into a profound silence. The scars were fully visible now under the harsh lighting, the silvery, branching web of electrical burns, the deep, gouged lines of pressure scarring. They were intricate, brutal, and utterly alien. Thorne stared, his mouth slightly agape. He had seen men torn apart by explosives, riddled with bullets, but he had never seen marks like these. Admiral Vance's memory, sparked by the sight in the medical center and now confirmed by the file, finally clicked into place. He had been a junior captain at the Pentagon when the after-action report for Project Trident had crossed his desk. It was the stuff of legends, a story told in hushed tones in secure facilities. A two-person special intelligence submersible, the Odyssey, had been deployed at crushing depth off a hostile coast, tasked with tapping a newly laid undersea fiber optic cable. During the operation, a catastrophic electrical failure had caused an explosion, killing the pilot instantly and frying every primary system. The submersible was dead in the water, its reactor going critical, under pressure that could implode the hull into a fist-sized ball of metal. The report stated that the sole surviving crew member, an enlisted signals intelligence specialist, had spent 3 hours in the dark, with the cabin flooding with freezing water and the air thick with toxic fumes from burning electronics. She had manually bypassed the fried circuitry, using salvaged wiring and her own body to complete circuits, absorbing multiple massive electrical shocks. She had rerouted power to a single data storage unit, ensuring the priceless intelligence gathered was not lost. Then, using nothing but a hand crank and her knowledge of the hydraulic systems, she had initiated an emergency ballast blow, a 1-in-a-million shot. The submersible had shot to the surface, imploding just seconds after she managed to force the escape hatch. She was found by a recovery team, barely alive, her arm fused to a plasma conduit, the intelligence canister clutched in her other hand. The specialist's name was redacted in the report Vance had read, but the description of the injuries was unforgettable. A latticework of keloids from contact with a shorting plasma conduit. Vance looked from the scars on Reed's arm to her calm, unreadable face. "The specialist on the Odyssey," he said, his voice filled with a reverence that shocked everyone in the room. "That was you." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. Commander Evelyn Reed simply looked back at him and gave a slow, single nod. A wave of understanding, so profound it was almost a physical force, washed over the room. Captain Davies looked like he had been struck by lightning. Lieutenant Commander Thorne sank into his chair, the full weight of his arrogance crashing down on him. He had mocked a legend. He had called a hero a paper pusher. He and his men, who prided themselves on their toughness, on enduring hardship, were in the presence of someone who had survived something beyond their darkest nightmares. Her silence, her composure, was not weakness. It was the absolute calm of someone who had faced the abyss and returned. The debrief was summarily concluded. Admiral Vance dismissed everyone except Reed. As the SEALs filed out, their faces were a mixture of shame and awe. In the passageway outside the room, Thorne stopped his men. He waited. When Commander Reed emerged, he did not speak. He simply snapped to attention, his back ramrod straight, and rendered the slowest, most precise salute of his life. It was a gesture of profound, unconditional respect. His team, without hesitation, followed his lead. For men, the elite of the elite, stood rigid, their hands held in a perfect salute to the quiet, unassuming woman they had mocked. Reed paused. She looked at Thorne, her eyes holding his for a long moment. She gave a single, formal nod of acknowledgement. Then she continued down the hallway, her footsteps echoing softly in the sudden, respectful silence. The apology had been offered, and it had been accepted, all without a single word. Later that night, the main operations center was quiet, populated only by a skeleton crew monitoring global signals. Commander Reed stood before the main holographic map, which now displayed a serene, slowly rotating globe. The glow of the blue oceans and green continents washed over her face. The next mission was already loading, the next puzzle already taking shape in the streams of data flowing beneath the surface of the world. It's a heavy burden, carrying a history like that in silence. She turned. Rear Admiral Vance was standing a few feet away, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He offered one to her. "History is data, Admiral," she said, accepting the mug. "It informs future action." "Perhaps," Vance conceded. He took a sip from his own mug. "Captain Davies has been reassigned. He'll be commanding a supply depot in Norfolk. Lieutenant Commander Thorne personally requested to be assigned to your unit, should you ever have 1 inch." Reed registered the information without comment, her eyes on the map. "Which brings me to my next point," Vance continued. He set his mug down on a console and produced a small black box. He opened it. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet, was a single, newly minted command patch. It was the Black Phoenix rising from waves and static. The motto, Fides Antenibris, was stitched below in sharp, silver thread. The Chief of Naval Operations reviewed the Trident after-action report this morning, along with the logs from today's exercise, Vance said. "He agrees with me. The nature of warfare is changing. The line between the operator and the technician is blurring. We need a new kind of weapon, a new kind of unit that can integrate signals dominance and special operations at a fundamental level. He's authorized the formation of a new special projects unit, Project Phoenix." He wants you to build it and command it. He held the box out to her. It was not just a promotion or a new assignment. It was a restoration, the official sanctioning of a symbol she had carried in private for years. It was the institution finally catching up to the reality she had lived. She took the patch from the box, its new threads stiff beneath her fingers. "Understood, Admiral. I know you do," he said. He picked up his mug and turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Get some rest, Commander. You've earned it." He left her alone in the quiet glow of the world. She looked from the patch in her hand to the swirling data streams on the map. Rest was a luxury. The mission was perpetual. A soft chime came from her personal tablet. A message from Master Chief Elias Thorne, a senior enlisted advisor in the C4I community, and a man who had been a quiet ally for years. The message was simple: heard what happened. Is the matter with the SEALs settled? Reed looked at the Phoenix patch, then back at the global map, at the silent, invisible wars being fought every second in the electromagnetic spectrum. Her fingers typed a brief, precise reply. Correction was achieved. The room was quieter now. The culture, in one small corner of the vast naval machine, was better. A new mission was already loading, and Commander Evelyn Reed was ready for it.